Since 1983, FAME has helped business and education work for Maine. Contact the authority, the Finance Authority of Maine.
Welcome. This is our Afterthoughts segment where we keep our guests around from our broadcast show for a little additional conversation and hopefully some more even more candid discussion of the issues. With us today, we had our Rapid Fire Sunday program, and with us today we have John Mahon, Professor of Management, Maine Business School at the University of Maine, Keith Luke, Director of the Westbrook Department of Economic and Community Development, Kathie Leonard, CEO of Auburn Manufacturing, and Chip Morrison, President of Androscoggin County Chamber of Commerce. Great. There's never enough time to cover all those issues on the regular show, so I'm glad we have this to do this on the web. So I do want to ask, I want to back up and talk to when we were talking about doing kind of our forecast for 2011, business forecast. And we had a mixed range there, some more optimistic than others. But Kathie, I want to come back to you, because that whole, and John too, because during the break we were talking about that issue of inflation. And what do you really see is going to happen? I'll start with you, John, and then I want to have you chime in, because you had some interesting thoughts about China too.
Well, I think we have to be concerned about inflation, particularly for the small businessman and woman. You know, Kathie and I, and maybe a few others, sometimes I think I'm one of the few people in the state who believes we can bring manufacturing back to the state. I find the current administration's signals contradictory there. I don't think the state's economy can grow, with all due respect to my colleagues, by just expansion of in-state business. I just don't think it's going to grow fast enough. And so we have to actually go out there and find those businesses to come into the state to complement what we do here. And I can't believe any banker, lawyer, businessman would be opposed to that, but we're not doing it.
Okay.
We're just not doing
Kathie.
Well, yes, inflation is always a concern for raw material prices and so forth, but what we've seen this past year is that, you know, we're getting stronger in our exports, and that's because the U.S. dollar has been down. And this has been through the quantitative easing policy that the Fed has implemented, that has helped that. And by lowering the U.S. dollar, we've actually, and buying back treasuries and so forth in a regulated sort of way, it's caused the currencies of other nations like China, who's been manipulating their currencies, they're having to subsidize their currencies a whole lot more. That's creating inflation on their side of the ledger, which is making their goods up to 33% more expensive when they're imported to the U.S.
Well, I just want to ask a question. I don't know if you guys have the answer, but it's kind of out of Maine, but in China, when will they stop manipulating their currency? Do you think that will happen? Do you think we'll get to that point? And if so, does that really level the playing field?
Well, I go to bed every night hoping that they will start doing
it's tomorrow,
that.
Right?
Yeah, I hope it's soon. We've been waiting for years and years, and the Senate keeps, you know, rumbling about it. I understand it's very, very complex. There's a lot of state issues that we have to consider. It's a big, important question, but businesses, especially manufacturers in this country, have been strangled by this.
And the thing I want to make sure people, I don't think people in Maine understand how that has an impact right here, right now.
Absolutely.
We think of China as like, well, that affects somebody else, but it impacts.
Well, they're subsidizing everything that they export to the U.S.
Right.
The government is actually subsidizing. In fact, when a customer called me yesterday and said that the Chinese product was going up 33%, he was actually complaining about it, and I said, oh, so the Chinese really are tired of working for nothing, huh?
Right.
Because that's exactly what they're doing. It's at the cost of Chinese labor, and they're not going to do that forever either.
Yeah.
They're smart people.
Hope makes a great breakfast, but a lousy dinner. I think. And then what I mean by that is I don't see the Chinese changing the value and actually allowing the currency to float for a very, very long time. What also complicates this is, quite bluntly, the Chinese are our drug dealer and we're the user. We owe them so much money, you know, we have to tread carefully, because if the Chinese would start dropping the dollar and changing currency, that would have a devastating impact.
We're their customers. They need the users.
Well, let me just say that.
You're right, Keith. You're right.
Keith, wait.
Okay, I got one more thought on that.
I think that what we're seeing with China is that we've learned how to manage international trade effectively. We've gotten our arms around trade and tariffs. What we haven't gotten our arms around is international monetary policy. As the WTO, as we negotiate trade agreements based on tariff rates, those are more easily understood, those are more easily negotiated. What we don't negotiate effectively are international financial monetary policies, and that's where we're losing. China, we've left them only this one tool left to manipulate, and that's what they do.
Kathie, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm
Okay.
going
Well,
to
I can add one more
more,
thing.
Go ahead.
China and some other countries have been pushing to move the dollar aside as the world unit of currency. Now, you might want to think about that for a moment. What happens if we go to another currency as the basis for international trade other than the dollar?
I did read that just this morning.
Scares
though,
me, and I ain't afraid of
Scares me.
nothing.
It scares me
There's
too.
the one thought I wanted to add is that I just read where this QE2 program is actually, we're now, we own twice as much of our debt as Japan and China together. So that has changed just recently because of this quantitative easing. So it's getting better, I think. You know, and you're absolutely right. We can't be beholden to
Well,
anybody.
and that threat's been hanging there, so
And
that's
they've been,
part of it.
yeah, they've been
Holding it
years
over
doing
it?
that.
Right,
Yes.
exactly. I want to move on. I want to ask the question
Absolutely.
about, I mentioned we want to talk about DECD, Department of Economic Community Development. So my question is this: what should the role of the Maine Department of Economic Community Development be? What signals does the appointment of Philip Congdon send? Congdon admits that his economic development experience is thin. At the nomination hearing, Senator Troy Jackson asked Congdon how he planned to attract businesses to Aroostook County and other rural areas of Maine, and Congdon replied, quote, "It's a question I haven't thought about." So, Chip, we'll start with you, and just your general thoughts about DECD.
I
and
have
where
a
you
lot
wanna
of
go.
thoughts about DECD. It's something I've been very consistent about for 4 administrations.
So you want it to get bigger, right?
No, I don't.
I'm kidding.
You know, DECD does a number of things. It's kind of a conglomerate organization. But the one thing that we talk about, and John talked about on the last question, was we need to do some business attraction. You can't do that with a government agency, period. And you know, what little money that DECD puts into it, I would put in a pot, and I would contract it out to somebody who can do that effectively. My thought in that is, I would give a shot to Maine & Company
Yep.
to do that because I
Yep.
think they've been fairly effective in what they do. And instead of spending a small amount of money maintaining a staff that has ropes around their hands, because I worked in the state government, you can't go out and you know, somebody wants you to travel here and there. By the time your travel voucher gets approved, the trip is over.
Right.
And so you need somebody who can be flexible. And frankly, a Maine & Company could, you know, have a sales force that goes out and it's compensated for what they bring in. And you can't do that. You can't do that with government
and
personnel.
DECD, government personnel can also, that whole issue of having to be fair to the whole state. Whereas when Maine & Company goes out, and I know they try to keep the whole state in mind, but if they got a business who's interested, they want to get it here. I don't care where they get it. And if it's not going to make everybody happy, if it's Southern Maine and that's where the business is going to go, they'll bring it in.
In sales, what we do know about salespeople for the most part is, you know,
Yeah.
they like to be compensated for what they sell.
Yep.
So if you're selling the state of Maine and somebody does it effectively,
Yeah.
they ought to be compensated therefore.
Yeah, they all want to run for governor though at some point, so you got to watch that. All right, Keith, I want to hear you about, what do you think about DECD? Because I know you work with businesses all the time. Are they getting benefit out of it? What do they want?
I think that, just as Chip has said, it's an organization right now they're primarily administrators. They administrate the Community Development Block Grant Program on a statewide basis. They manage our tax increment financing programs. They maintain oversight of the Pine Tree Development Zone program. They administrate things. Business attraction isn't a priority for them. Being out and moving around in the business community isn't a priority for them. Over the last decade, they've cut the people, they've cut the budget. One of the things that's important is that the amount of money that we put into economic development at the state level is not very significant. There aren't tens of millions of dollars to be redirected through rejiggering the organization.
Right.
I think they do
Well, there's
some
nothing
important
left there.
things.
They pretty much-
I think
it's been
that
decimated.
one of the things that we've learned in Greater Portland, we've in the process of forming the Greater Portland Economic Development
Right.
Corporation.
How's that work?
And I'm optimistic
Yeah.
that we will be able to get out and spread the business development.
So you guys are seeing it. Let us have our regional piece. Let us work on our parts, and we'll coordinate together because it's what's good for him is good for us. But if we, let the money come out, and you guys could be doing the sales.
Well, we could, or we could have a sales force that works for all of us,
Yeah,
frankly.
exactly.
And I mean, bring them in here, they'll find the best spot. We want them in Maine.
That's exactly what it boils down to. When we have a company that comes to either me at the city of Westbrook or comes to a Matt Jacobson at Maine & Company, or in another one goes to the Bolus Company looking
Right.
for a 40,000 square foot facility.
Yep.
They're looking for a 40,000 square foot facility. They've got a short list of criteria they need to meet. They don't care whether that building is in Scarborough, Westbrook, Portland, or Auburn. They need to get in. They needed to get in on favorable terms, and they have a date in mind that they'd like to move in. We need to be getting these people the answers that they need to get them to Maine. And then, in some respects, from a commercial real estate standpoint, the chips are going to fall where they do based on availability.
That's a very bad expression, by the way. Let the chips fall where they may. Let me pick up on that, because 30 years ago, Lewis and Auburn created Lewis and Auburn Economic Growth Council. Prior to that, the two communities fought with each other over pieces of development. From that landmark time, working together, we've seen far greater development. Kathie's on the board there. It is a wonderful organization. Working together, Lewis and Auburn have been much more powerful force than they ever were separately.
Yeah, and I know we're seeing that same thing in the Mid-Coast, and I know that Greater Portland piece is doing that too. John?
One just really quick thing. My doctorate is in strategic planning. I would ask anyone at this table, indeed anyone watching the broadcast, can you tell us what Maine Economic Development Plan is and what the criteria for success are and how have we done? Please, somebody tell me what it is. We have no such plan. We have no clue as to what we are doing. We have no focus as to where we are going. We desperately need that.
Well, in about 2 weeks, I'm going to have the governor's new economic development team on, so I want to give him a couple more weeks, though, to come up with that plan. Then we'll have it laid out for
I just want to say that, following up on that, we get calls and mail from many other states trying to solicit us to go outside of the borders of Maine to locate our businesses.
Really?
And I think, how come no one do we do any of that from the state of Maine? Somehow I just can't picture us as a state agency calling up, soliciting, and they do. They've got people, they've got telemarketers out there calling for the state of Virginia and various other states.
So this is one of those things from a business point of view. I think probably most of us agree that we need to spend our money more wisely. We got to
marketing. We got to spend
but you can't. It's like, what is the adage? In bad times, you got to market more, and in good times, you got to market even more. Whatever. It's always about trying to figure out how to really market. So we can't scrimp on that. But how do we convince voters that that's the right thing?
I give you
Taxpayers.
Years ago, I had lunch with a Fortune 500 CEO that you would all know, and they were talking about expanding their business. I said, "Why not come to Maine?" And he laughed at me and said, "Where was Maine?" So I'd like, well, it's in. And he said, "No," and he handed me his day planner for the month. In that month, he had 31 state governors coming to visit him to ask him and talk to him about development. He said his entire time as chief executive officer, no governor from Maine has ever picked up the phone to talk to him. Gets back to your salesperson idea. One of the real salespersons has to be the governor.
And just before, we're going to have to close out here, but from the business point of view, and that business owner, you guys representing other businesses, they would say, yeah, you know what, we want our taxes to go down, we want to control spending, but that's an investment we know we need to do. Is that your businesses, would your members say that? Yeah. Okay, did you hear that? I mean, that's the kind of thing I want to have businesses on to talk about that, because it is hard. We're trying to figure out how to cut, but we also need to know, where do we make the smart investments? Okay, I got to wrap it there.
Super. Fun.
Okay, thanks a lot. I appreciate you guys all being around. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.